and welcome to the Service Operations Podcast. I am your host, 𝗕𝗲𝗵𝘃𝗶𝗁. Our guests are from different industries and functions. They will share their experience, strategies, and the changing landscape to help you take the service operations of your business to the next level. Hi Arnab, it's so lovely to have you on this conversation. Arnab is a social entrepreneur and trustee with 𝗵𝘃𝗵𝘃𝗶 India Foundation. He has a global view in the work he does, and we'll talk to him about how that translates into day-to-day for enterprises, as well as the importance of communication. So Arnab, over to you. Take us through your journey of how you came up to this point, and we'll take the conversation forward.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, 𝗕𝗲𝗵𝗃𝗶. It's such a pleasure being on your podcast. Well, at this point, what I'm doing is I represent a United Nations program, and we're looking to promote entrepreneurship as a way out of poverty. So that, of course, takes me to explore various dimensions of the social and the human element, behaviors being a very important aspect of all of this. And I've been always interested in behaviors, and I've been interested in how people communicate with each other and demonstrate behaviors in the process. We've had, I've had some exposure in working with the banking environment, and in one of the banks where we had a little bit of an elbow space and a little bit of a privilege to be able to do a few things that connected behavior to customer service and customer delivery and performance. We were able to use various aspects of how people in general relate to people with respect to the services that they offer. Now, that I found very interesting because behaviors, I felt, are at a very intrinsic and a basic level cannot really be taught. It could be inspired, yes. I can teach someone how to courtesy and how to be polite, and I can put some of those things on a manual, but I can't really, I'm not sure if one can really teach respect and put that on a manual. Say some of the things, yes, but to put respect on a manual, I'm not sure. Or to put commitment onto a manual, or to put persistence onto a manual may not be that simple.
Yeah.
It could be much easier to put out certain templates and then have people run those templates. So we picked up the low hanging fruit. We looked at some templates, and we also, I believe at one point I believed that, of course, it may not be trainable, but certain things could potentially be a matter of habit. So if I'm faking it before I can make it, chances are I will make it at some point.
Yeah.
Maybe a saint is a sinner that never gave up. so that's something we held onto as a belief in the organization. I was very fortunate to have wonderful colleagues, both above and around me at the time, who supported this work, and this gave me some confidence in that the way we were assessing performance in a very transactional and a commercial
Dynamic.
setting.
Yeah,
Yes.
dynamic setup.
Also dynamic, of course, because everything was changing. Yes, indeed. Could be linked to behavior, and so we were using behavior as a connect to understanding performance. And this gave me some insights. And as I progressed from there and moved to private banking space, international private banking, and I was in Geneva for several years, and I was setting up several desks. It's a very nascent stage of evolution of banking setups at a transactional level. I felt that behaviors need to be at the center of it. We need to be able to place behaviors in the middle of whatever it is that we were doing, whether it was customer service, whether it was communication with various agencies, with the regulators, all of that. And so one thing led to another, and around 2007 and 8, when the subprime crisis hit
Hmm.
us rather bad, and I was in Europe at the time. I was in Geneva. Again, that's to do with behavior. The very fundamental behaviors that came to the fore at the point was fear and greed. You could see
Hmm.
fear and greed being demonstrated. So these were two inimical, opposing forces that were sort of tugging at each other, and so that led to the crash of the many to the
Yeah.
demise of
In
many banks at the time
many.
that
Yeah.
were putting out models that believed in, let's say, promoting the froth rather than substance. And of course, that came from greed. So I could see the dark underbelly of the work that I was doing at that point. And then something led me to explore the world of development finance. And so initial conversations with the United Nations. Of course, in Geneva, there is the second largest settlement of the UN, next to New York. And
Hmm.
I was very fortunate to get in touch with some people who were running a program that was again about behaviors. And the way the program was promoted was to uh, was to again link behaviors to enterprise growth, both at a startup stage as well as a scale up stage in
Hmm.
promoters. So the idea was that behaviors are happening at various levels. They happen at an individual level, they happen at an enterprise or an organizational level, and
Yeah.
they also happen at a regional level. Could be a district, could be a state, could be a country in a context, and again in the world in general. And if the relationship of these behaviors at these various levels could be understood, could be documented, could be recorded, could be used uh, in a way that allows one to build onto the next,
Hmm.
then there are chances that this could be linked to a developmental agenda, which is what this program was doing. So we were focusing on behaviors and good behaviors. What is it to be a good entrepreneur? For example, was a very fundamental question that we looked at. And then from there, we looked at the cultural aspect. So
Hmm.
how do good entrepreneurs come together and behave as a community? So the aspect of community consciousness, and then move that up to trade and business linkages with respect to access to markets, technology, and finance. So all of that seemed to be hugely interesting to me, and it was almost a natural progression from what I was doing earlier to what I then did around 2007 and 8 is when I did made the transition to the world of development, and I've been engaged in that work ever since. I've come back to Kolkata in 2013. That's when I continue the work that has been mandated me by UNCTAD. UNCTAD is the UN Conference on Trade and Development.
Interesting. My mind still works service operations. So I'm picking up two things from what you were talking about. Concept of a composite, what do you call it? Bringing everything together. So you briefly spoke about yeah, the work that you did in the bank. Typically, when we talk, say, operations or when we talk service, we always have in mind just one or two scores that are tracked. Either you track how many complaints you have got or you track those kind of things. But what I recollect is that the score that we constructed was it incorporated each and every touch point, and then that evolved as a score. So it's not really about the score, but it's about looking at the perspectives which bring about overall experience for the customers. The other thing was about culture. So we'll talk more about culture as we go along, but creating a culture despite the fact that certain behaviors can't be instilled, as you said. So we cannot get people to respect somebody or be polite to somebody, but at the same time creating a very enabling culture, I think, is something that we'll talk along the way. So Arnab, tell us a little more about this holistic approach that you mentioned a while ago.
Sure. Satindra, this is interesting. There's a good amount of research behind this. In fact, it started in with a gentleman at the Harvard University who looked at certain attributes of an achieving society versus a society that wasn't really performing to potential, and it saw that there are very specific ways in which behaviors are being demonstrated by people in an achieving society vis-a-vis societies that are not at those levels, and it's these behaviors that were clustered into certain what the UN refers to as personal entrepreneurial competencies, and it's these competencies which are again markedly different from traditional business skills that form the basis of this developmental work. Now, I'll give you an example. So, say I'm now on the 19th floor of a 36 floor high rise in Kolkata. Now, to be able to set this up, the first thing that the promoter may have had to do, or the builder may have had to do, was to build a decent foundation for the structure. To support a 36 floor structure, you possibly needed to go down about 12 floors. So that's what we refer to as the planning system of behaviors. This includes anything to do with information seeking, anything to do with a systematic approach to breaking large tasks down into subtasks with clear time frames. And very importantly, it has to do with goal setting. Now, all of these items form part of what we refer to as the planning cluster of behaviors. Of course, this can be broken down into various others, but I'm just I'm just staying at this level. The next level would be the part of the structure that you can actually see, the part of the building that can be seen from the outside, which is something we could refer to as achievement. Now, in achievement, you have several attributes. You have persistence, which is necessary, and persistence also includes taking responsibility for goals and objectives. We have commitment. Commitment, whereas persistence is to do with processes, commitment is to do with people and the valuing of relationships. So, and these relationships also include the self. So that's commitment for you. Then we have calculated risk taking, and we're taking risks at all times. But then it's very important to in this program, for example, we look at how uncertainty and risk are two very different elements. One sometimes refers to risk as or uncertainty as risk. The fact of the matter being that risk is measured, whereas uncertainty can't or isn't measured or can't be measured. So assessing risk, mitigating risk, and then taking that risk. So all of these aspects are measurable elements.
So
And
it's a
then moving on.
known portion. It's a known part of. I mean, we know about these
Yes,
things.
yes. The known known, not the known
Yeah,
unknown or the unknown known. So,
yeah,
and then you move on, and then you look at a very interesting dimension of work, which is demand for efficiency and quality. Now, this quality consciousness is something that needs, well, it requires practice, but needs to be innately practiced to be developed. Now, all of these elements that I'm mentioning are competencies. They're not traditional skills, they're
yeah,
competencies. And competencies are things that are left in you after you've forgotten everything you've learned, right? It's much like education. So
right.
it's not really trainable, but these are inspirable. Let's just say that they can be communicated, but it requires inspiration to be able to communicate, not motivation, but inspiration. And these are two different things. And then you move on to another cluster of behaviors, which is right on top of the building, perhaps a flag or something that bears the name of what the building is, etc. And that's something we refer to as the power system, the power cluster. And in power, you have two very important behaviors or competencies, which would be persuasion and networking. That's one, which is to do with convincing people, bringing people over to your point of view. And that, of course, requires networking. So one builds a network for the sake of developing an idea that can be promoted through that network, and not just building a network for building sake.
Networking sake. Yeah,
That's right. That's right. So that's an important attribute. And another attribute of power is independence and self-confidence. And apparently, this is something that can be
inculcated,
developed.
learned.
Yes,
Yeah,
learned. over a period of time. So independence is about seeking autonomy sometimes from the rules and or control of others, but in a way that it's beneficial to all parties, not in a way that just benefits you. So that's
Yeah.
where the values and the ethical and the moral element also comes through. Yeah, so that's the system. And I found this system way back about 12 years ago when I was looking around, a disillusioned private banker looking for something useful to do. And then that's when I found the system, and it was very intriguing. And I thought, I should take the effort to introduce this to the governments in India, which is something that I've been doing.
If you recollect, there was one book on quality that you had introduced, which was "I Know It When I See It." I think I still have a copy of that book. So quality, there are certain things which you just know and feel. I don't know how one can really, learn them or get there. But I think in on an overall perspective, I think we can always be conscious of things and then improve on that aspect.
Quite right. Satindra, there are two aspects that I feel are important. One would be the ability to appreciate something, and the other is the direct appreciation of something. Now, for quality consciousness, we need to possibly start with the primer. The primer is the putty that you apply on the walls first before the paint goes onto it. So the ability to hold the paint is to do with the quality of the primer that gets applied. So if I do a good job of applying the primer, then chances are that the paint will stick. There is the inner and the outer dimension, and the inner dimension is to do with the consciousness. It's to do with what is important to me. Why should I be doing this? So there's a good amount of philosophizing that becomes necessary with someone who's just doing a 9 to 5, going out in the morning, packing a lunchbox, coming back in the evening. Why am I doing what I'm doing becomes a very important question. Otherwise, the quality is going to be a taut item that will sit on the surface. And the inner dimension then becomes missing. And so the other thing about quality is the quality isn't in my experience, it's not something that you can compartmentalize. If you have a quality existence in your kitchen, you'll carry over that existence in your in the boardroom and in other areas. So it's a fungible, it's easily transferable. So with all of these competencies, because we're dealing with behavior and the human element here, it's difficult to switch on and switch off. If you're quality conscious, you are quality conscious.
That's
That
true.
is
That's
it.
true. But there are certain elements like, see, say with quality also comes your ability to organize. With that comes your ability to have good time management. So I think there are lots of compensatory competencies, as I might say. So you may not
Yes.
have like one completely, but you may be able to compensate those. So now just coming back, one question
Please.
that I have in my mind is that when we talk about an entrepreneur, see today, because we have read so much, and if you really go to any social media platform, there's so much being written about, do these things. It looks like these are all easy formulas, but having set up and coming from a small business family, I know that it's not all so simple. But on the other side, see, when we talk about planning, when we talk about the stages or the behaviors that you were mentioning, that's for somebody who understands or who's so educated, who knows what planning means, what maybe accounting means, what risk taking means. So if I want to start something as an individual, okay, I just go get started. I'll take things as they come, and there is a bit of planning and everything that happens, but it doesn't happen in a very organized way as we see in the organized sector. So now when you're working with governments, basically you're working on people through the
Yes.
government, right? If I get that
Yes.
right. So
Yes, please.
how do you distinguish, or how do you manage this organized versus unorganized piece of dealing with people or getting them to achieve the objectives that are set out?
It's a difficult question, Satinder. It's something I've been grappling with, but I'll tell you what the approach. The approach is to again at an initial level to understand that for example, India is known as a land of entrepreneurs. There's a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah.
but when
That's
you're
what I had at the
connecting,
back of my mind, that you can just go and open a tea stall, man. I
yes,
just think, yeah, okay, today I want to start. I just go find some 2 by 2 feet table space and just go and get started.
and there's a good expression for that. It's called jugaad. Now
Yeah,
to connect jugaad with innovation, or to disconnect jugaad with innovation, is the
yeah,
question.
yeah,
So the question is, do we connect uh, with a demand for efficiency and quality in a proper way, which is to make things better, faster, and cheaper? Do I distance that from a frugal entrepreneurial leap, a creative leap, for example, that may not be very sustainable, for example? So, one of the aspects, in fact, 3 years ago, in the UN General Assembly, there was a paper, there was a resolution that was set up on entrepreneurship for sustainable development. Therefore, what what the paper draws attention to is the SDGs, the Sustainability Development Goals of the United Nations, which are very important goals for governments and for people alike, for the survival of the planet. We're talking the very survival and existence. It's an existential crisis. Uh, Now, to be able to thrive in an uncertain world, in a world of, where you mentioned earlier, dynamism, it's chaotic, and the various kinds of stimuli from various directions, I think it's good for an entrepreneur to be prepared. It's good for an entrepreneur to look at entrepreneurship as a practice rather than as a hobby. And there is a difference. So when you're looking at, when there are some people who are running a chai shop or something, most of them are actually looking at these as something that just keeps them going, and it's a hobby, and if something fails, it fails, and they're not really reasoning why is it that they're failing, and they're not philosophizing, they're not getting deep into the framework on which the establishment exists. So our intent is to point to the presence of a framework, and this framework is empirical, which means that it's not come out of a professor's hat, but it has been seen from the behaviors of entrepreneurs, that good entrepreneurs behave in a certain number of ways, and not so good entrepreneurs or struggling entrepreneurs do not behave in exactly those ways. So apparently there is a very strong connection between demonstration of these behaviors and strong business outcome. And it is this connection that we try and establish before the governments, and through the governments, the people. So when people start realizing that, okay, so let me understand, if I were to do some systematic planning and monitoring next to my goal setting, before going into calculated risk taking, and then before going into opportunity seeking or taking initiatives, then perhaps that pathway is going to give me a better chance at entrepreneurial success. And this appreciation is something that we try and make. You have, for example, lots of people who are very strong on the power cluster of behaviors, the networking piece, the persuasion piece, the independence and self-confidence piece. But they may not have had enough, uh, may not have done enough homework on their information seeking, on the research, for example. And so that can topple the building at any point, and you can see that happen. So one way would be to learn as we go, and there's some entrepreneurs that'll fall by the process, that'll fall because they may not be aware of the intrinsic frame, some of the very basic behaviors that they may not be demonstrating. And the other would be to go about this in an organized and a systematic way, and our preference is for the systematic and the organized dimension, so that one is aware of one's abilities before one starts to work on lifting it.
So, just coming here, what would be an example of something that you would call success? I mean, so that we can relate it to what we do, even
Yes,
in say corporates. Many of us operate as entrepreneurs. Of course, we have that
yes,
entire support of
yes,
funding as well as people, but somewhere in the mind we have this concept that we are running this show and we need to take it forward. So I'm sure there are a lot of things that we can pick up from broadly what you're saying to see what can be incorporated here on this side.
Sure. Your questions are getting more difficult with each
Oh,
passing
I
question.
don't intend to.
No, but they're absolutely fantastic, and I'm so glad that
Mhm.
you're thinking so deeply about this, because when it comes to success or defining success, we all have our definitions. There's a balance sheet definition of success, which is financial success, and that applies across companies big and small. There is also, which we think is more important and more fundamental, there is a definition of success that's based on meaning of success. So what does it mean for me to thrive in a difficult environment? Could be success, for to arrive at the meaning, to arrive at what it is that could be causing a transformation or a shift in the way people look at uh, uh, certain drivers being important. I'll give you an example. So uh, if a large corporation has an opportunity to work in a very difficult environment, where it involves mindset change of people, now that's enormously
Yeah,
difficult
that's the most difficult.
environment. Yes, and they would say, yes, they would say it's not our mandate. Listen, you do what you have to do, and once you're ready, then come and we will buy from you. Now this is the way many transnationals operate. But the sensitive transnationals today, and especially those who are looking at promoting entrepreneurship at the lower levels in their value chains, both on the supply side as well as on the distribution side, are saying that, listen, we'd like to partner with you, we'd like to grow with you, and we'll help you in developing micro enterprises, and we'll offer you the technologies that's needed because we have access to technologies, and we'll offer you that access. We will also offer you market access, right? And we will also offer you other input, management input, and various others that you might need. And I'd like you to stay independent. We have an arm's length relationship, and I'm going to contract with you, and I'm not going to push you, but you will lift yourself to a place where we can work together, and I will set up this value chain for you. So in the meantime, you can work with others that are a level higher, a notch higher than you are, so that ultimately the chain is ready. Now, this is a very good way of transferring technologies in the developing country, or a least developed country. In many countries in Africa, for example, where transnationals are active, there's a good amount of work that the transnationals are doing to bring about mindset change and culture shifts at community levels, as a result of which they're also growing commercially. So, if there is a balance that can be achieved you know, uh, between people, profit, and planet, in a cultural setting, that could potentially be for some corporations more meaningful and successful than only driving at financial success, to my mind. So yes, people, planet, and processes. I think it all goes together. And if one is able to look at these as important ingredients to a successful definition, or the definition of what constitutes success, then I think that's a very good starting point. And more companies are realizing that their own customers are paying attention to what these companies are looking at as a definition of success. Which is why, for example, I would potentially buy, if I had a choice to go to a very large retail outlet, and I knew that this retail outlet is investing in people at a community level. For example, I could think of IKEA. It's just a global example, which is doing tremendous work at the community setting. Then I would feel good about buying a product of IKEA. So that's happening gradually.
People are becoming conscious of this. Coming back to work, you're working with UNCTAD, and they have certain objectives. That's quite global. It's at the policy level, and that goes down to the governments. And the lowest denominator here in terms of people is the people of that particular place. Take an example. So you have UNCTAD at one level, the government of India at a particular level, and then you'll have the states, and then there are these various maybe five or six or seven levels, uh, you
Hierarchies,
know,
yes.
hierarchies, and also the communication, what is communicated by UNCTAD, how does it reach, or how does it get translated?
Indeed.
So there's a lot of transmission that happens from one level
Yes.
to the other. Communication plays a very big role in understanding and in expressing. So how do you tackle this, the fact that you're working with different states in India? Each state is like another country. The people are different, the culture is different. Communication plays a very large role in small and large enterprises. Of course, we can talk
Sure.
about a little bit of the work that we had done earlier. But now, coming to your kind of work, where there is so much of diversity and level differences, just tell us, how do you manage this communication piece?
A favorite philosopher of mine is Aristotle, and he promotes communication as a coming together of three very basic and very fundamental elements. He refers to them as ethos. Ethos is to do with credibility. Who is it that's communicating, and what does that person stand for? The truth, the knowledge, the values that the person stands for becomes important. So that's ethos. Then you have pathos. Pathos is to do with the passion that one carries the communication through with. And this comes from an intrinsic belief in what one is communicating. If, it, if it's just off, if it's just off a manual, that's one, and if I truly believe in it, that's another. The conviction, the belief, the trust that one has in what one is communicating, and if it's really part of me.
Yeah.
And the third is uh, logos, and not necessarily in that order, but logos is about wisdom. It's about wisdom laden with insights
Hmm.
and with very deep knowledge and understanding. Now, I can't think of another dimension of communication, and this has been so beautifully put together by Aristotle in his
Yeah.
time, 5,000 years ago, but it's still so valid and relevant today. So when you put these elements together, you find that you're looking for agents of change. And these
Okay.
agents of change can happen at a New Delhi level, but a governmental level. It can happen at a farmer level, at a very small entrepreneur level who really has a conviction and the passion and the knowledge, for example, to transmit and transfer. So my job has really been to identify agents of change, whether they're very senior officers, administrative services, etc., bankers, professionals, lawyers, etc., or the farmers, craftspersons, but with a tremendous zeal and a zest for acquiring not just the knowledge, but the learning by doing principles, because knowledge can come in several ways. Of course, a professor communicates knowledge in a certain way, and the student receives it. Yes, the spirit, the essence, the essence. Yes, what is left after you've taken out all the non-essential bits. And the Greeks had a very nice way of doing it. They called it the via negativa. What is left after you've taken off anything that is unnecessary is the essence. So to get to that, there are people who are extremely interested in linking behaviors to success, and the meaning of success then becomes more important than what success, the traditional definitions of
Yeah.
success as financial success is. So people who find meaning in success more important are the people who've sort of who have been able to sort of attract to the program. Thankfully, what happens is when you bring in the first few, they then bring in more, and then
Others.
ultimately you set up a cause.
Mhm.
So it's this cause then that sort of has takes on a life of its own, and then starts. It then becomes much larger than anything that you would have potentially started. So I'm beginning to see, Satinder, and I must say this with all humility, that I'm beginning to see that the program is really taking roots in a country as diverse and as
Right.
interesting as India, with all states having different aspirations and all of that. But there is this one cause of a higher purpose that is driving all of the peoples that I'm in touch with, which is to strive and to be a better version of yourself.
Good. Actually, that's the, the why of what you're doing. The why is always important. Actually, it's a why that propels, person forward. So that's very interesting. So again, just a little bit more on how do you, how would you translate this to something that can be used again back to in companies, or in
Sure. Sure.
particularly in service-based companies. Of course, I like this. I think we use this concept also often. So we find the person who is most influential in that particular area that we are working in, and then we try to support that person to take the message forward, because it's not always what you
Indeed.
speak as a leader that people pick up. They need people, what you would call colleagues or people at the same level talking that language, and that has a higher
Carriers.
acceptance.
Carriers.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So that has a higher acceptance. So how would you like translate this to what can be used in companies, particularly in service-based companies?
Okay, and service-based companies are companies where the human element plays a very important role. So
Yeah.
it's only natural that they're putting out certain behaviors at an enterprise level. So what we would want to do is to start with the why at a individual, at an employee
Yeah.
level, at the personal level, and if, for example, there is an emphasis, as most companies usually do, in my experience, initially on expertise. There's a good amount of emphasis on expertise. You're usually brought into an organization after management school or engineering school or some such, because you have a certain expertise that you can add to the organization. Whether you're a coder, or whether you're a developer, whether you're a maybe a scientist or an engineer or a banker, some very specific domain specific. So that usually forms the crux of one's entry into an organization. And then in the induction manual, there's a good amount of work that is explained. Your day-to-day work, your routines are described. Um, to add to that, the dimension of why is it that you're here? What is it that you're doing, and why? That I think becomes really, really important. And so many people that you talk to now are somewhat disgruntled with what they've been doing, and they are doing for a while now, because the connect is somewhat dubious. They could be getting a good amount of monies, they could be getting a good amount of a reward and recognition, but somehow the connect seems missing. So if it's possible to not treat humans as resources, and I know I'll have a truck to pick up with HR, but humans are not really resources, but humans, if it's possible to look at humans as partners in progress rather than resources that will enable such progress, then I think that's a good starting point for an organization. And again, so that's at the first level. The second level is at the middle management level. So as people move up and they're stressed and they're somewhat burnt out and they feel the pressures of doing the same thing again and again, sometimes the only rest to the human mind is variety. It's not really rest. You don't really have to go to a vacation. But
Change of
if you have
activity. Change of
exactly a range of
activity is a
activities,
break.
and if you're allowed to take some initiatives, but if it's a very straight jacketed role and I can't move left or right without asking too many questions, and the fear of upsetting the status quo, etc., so then that becomes a bit of a limiting thing in the middle management. So what you then do there is you promote some of the inventive competencies, the demand for efficiency and quality, for example, or persistence. So these people can go on to create something if they're incentivized to create something, and a little bit of risk taking as well. CRT. We refer to this as, I'm sorry, the acronyms keep coming because I'm in we use this day in and day out. So calculated risk taking is something that can be introduced at a slightly senior level, so that there's a sandbox that's introduced to each employee, and they're allowed to experiment and try a few things, some of which may not work. But the trust and the confidence that you give to the person in making those changes, little changes, and in a small limited way, would be, I think, useful. And then when it comes to top management and leadership, I think the one thing that really needs to happen there is, to my mind, understanding the power of vulnerability. So power in general, but to be able to say I don't know requires a lot of heroism. It requires a huge amount of courage and independence and self-confidence. And so bringing in that aspect of, listen, I don't know, but my team is much better equipped than I am, and they're the ones who are going to deliver. And I'm going to draw your attention to, stars that I have. And so that promotes the next level of leadership, because the idea of a leader is to generate another. The partner in a consulting firm, the only job of a partner should be to develop another partner. So at various levels, you're working on skills at a certain level. So the planning behaviors and all of that, and then the risk taking and the achievement driven behaviors around quality, innovation, persistence, commitment, etc. Responsibility, of course, and then at the highest levels, uh, being a catalyst for the next level of growth. And some uh, organizations have taken to it very nicely. In fact, some chief ministers in certain states have also taken this up, which is a club. So they set up a club of these, I was mentioning earlier, the agents of change. And these agents of change could come from various levels in the organization or in the state, depending on how the entity is administered. It's pretty much the same thing. The state is a corporation, a big corporation. So they would pick up people who have that ability uh, uh, to appreciate the connect that mindset change may have on outcome. And so these people are then harnessed and put into a sounding board, a club, if you like. And so the club does two things for the person in charge. The first would be that it could offer a sounding board for decisions that the leadership takes, because you have a small organization in about 40, 50 people that could reflect various aspects of the much larger organization. So that's one. And the second could be uh, that they all become ambassadors
Hmm.
of the organization.
In their
So there's
respective areas.
not necessarily, Satindra. So, for example, I could be a young lawyer in an organization, maybe 22 years old. I've just come out of law school and I've just got into this organization. But then they see in me a certain trait that allows the organization to invest in my leadership acumen. And so then I represent the organization at that level. So if I'm part of the chairman's club, then I represent the organization. I don't just represent the law division. Yeah. And if this can be done, if this sort of a club can be constituted with HERA's high impact entrepreneurs or high impact entrepreneurs in a corporate, who are all working on purpose, routines, and relationships, and not just one over the other. So the why, the routines, they're quite adept. They understand how routines work, and relationships, which is really nothing but trust and competence. So all of that coming together would make for a very effective, to my mind, and a very entrepreneurial way of creating something that you could refer to as leadership
Okay.
circles in organizations.
So are you still into this creating acronyms, or are they a part of part of the larger, these are things that are in use, or are you the creator of?
No, I've been creating lots of acronyms. One acronym we created, and the government has taken to it very, very well. In fact, the erstwhile Minister of Commerce and Industries really loved it. Mr. Suresh Prabhu, he really loved this. HERAs. Now,
Ah.
HERAs, HIEERAS, HERAs are high impact entrepreneurs from emerging regions for action.
And they are Hiras. I will. So when you
They're
first said
HERAs.
it, I thought it's a diamond that you're talking about. So
So
yeah,
they're
that's
healers. No,
interesting.
acronyms all the time, Satinder. I love acronyms. I just love it because it's
Yeah.
so easy to translate and convey the meaning
Remember.
and very quickly
Yeah,
and
easy to
remember.
remember. Yeah, we're talking about behavioral changes, or modification of behavior. These changes then are changes in culture, so to say, because all these behaviors together make up the culture.
Yes.
So if we are making these changes, there is a natural resistance to change by humans. We don't like to change things, right? So,
Yeah.
so how does that piece get tackled other than by,
Beautiful,
these
beautiful.
leaders who are doing it?
No, that's a beautiful question, and this is the crux of the matter. So, a demand-driven program rather than a donor-driven program then becomes important. So, you introduce demand-drivenness, and how do you do this? All you do is lay it out. So, for example, I was working with a group yesterday of people, and we have these the competencies laid out here, and we see that they are demonstrating competencies at a certain level. Okay, so this is towards the end of a workshop, and we find that there is calculated risk taking at 2%, and there is independence and self confidence at 16%. Okay, so what does it mean for someone to be very confident about one's product or service, but is not very confident about how to set up an approach path to a new area or service, creation. And if you continue to look here, you will see DEQ, a demand for efficiency and quality, is at 19%. So I'm very confident about my product. I have got a great product. I've invested in the product. I've got great confidence in it. But my ability to take risks is very, very limited. I'm very risk averse, for example. That's not going to take me anywhere, right? So what you do is you just lay it out. Just lay it out. And then you'd find that there is an inner calling in most people to say, all right, now I'm going to do it because I think it's good for me, because I need business results. So one of the basic assumptions that we are making here is that everyone has that inner drive to move to the next level. That's an assumption we are making. And if that is true, then all you do is you lay out the structure, and then you see that there is a natural interest in people to
Ah,
practice.
that's important, and that's the difference I think between training and learning.
Absolutely. And this is so
You're
important. So,
training, yeah.
again, the difference between, I'll lay out two very specific pairs, since you mentioned this training and learning. One pair is to do with a challenge and an obstacle. Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Something that's staying in your path, because you looked at resistance. You mentioned resistance. Yes, there is resistance, and there are two components of resistance. One would be a challenge, and the other is an obstacle. Now, I'm getting close to 50. I want to get on top of Everest, right? And I know that I've not been really very fit. I haven't gone to the gym on a regular basis. I haven't been training at all for hiking, and for for such a leap is tremendous. A challenge there is the internal conviction that I have to convince myself that I can still do it.
Hmm.
Right? That's my challenge, is to overcome my uh, own
Mindset,
resistance to,
yeah,
yes,
limits.
to basically challenge myself. So that's
Hmm.
internal. Whereas obstacles are the raising of 15 lakhs to pay the Sherpas, and to get
Hmm.
yourself trained in a school, and to go out there and do whatever. All of that is those are those are things in my path that I need to
Hmm.
overcome. Those are
Hmm.
situations. So
Hmm.
the situations are out there, but the real challenge needs to be overcome. So to my mind, overcoming the challenges is more primary and fundamental than getting to obstacles. So that's one.
Hmm.
The other set that I'm going to look at, and this is so true for most corporations that I've been introduced to and worked with, is training with respect to lifting motivation versus inspiration. So now, motivation is something that you have motivational speakers, for example, that are hired for a day or two and come in, and they give you a talk, and they sort of lift you. They lift the adrenaline levels. Oh, I can do it. You can do it. I can do it. I have done it. You can do it. Uh, so that's one aspect. Inspiration comes from a very deep space, and no other person other than my
You, yeah,
possibility can
yeah.
inspire me. So I inspire myself. There's no one else that can inspire me. So what I do is I go for a very small, let's say a little something, and I'm able to do it. The kind of learning that I get from that experience of overcoming an
Hmm.
obstacle or a challenge is tremendous. It's
Yeah,
very, very powerful.
yeah,
So who am I learning from? I'm learning from myself, rather than the other. So
yeah.
Satyendra can place lots of goodies, learning tools, and all of that before me. But if I feel that this is something that builds on my own experience,
Yeah.
then that learning really
Oh yeah,
sticks.
that doesn't. It's not undone. No, that's how we forget most of what we learn in school. And
Yes,
yeah, and
yes,
while you were using these words, because sometimes we use these words just by habit, we don't really get into the depth of what exactly it means. I remember when we used to talk about complaints, customers complaints, there used to be a case number. I am sure this happens in hospitals also. So it becomes a case, and the
yes,
moment a complaint becomes a case, the emotion gets lost, and then it's only a case, it's only paper, it's only what you have to do, and the real person behind that gets lost. So yeah, I think it's also about being mindful of the work that you do. We've spoken about a lot of things which actually propel a person to do better, to give their best, to be engaged, and yeah, that's like the
from
why of
inside. And from the inside, the more
from the
important thing is
inside.
the inside.
Yes,
so
yes,
so
yes.
uh, I believe that training, you cannot train a person to be an entrepreneur, an entrepreneur, a leader, or any of those things. I think
Hmm.
you can inspire a person, and
Yeah.
you can't really inspire it directly. All you do is to offer possibilities that allow the person to be inspired.
Hmm.
So you can have role models if you like. You can learn from role models, you can observe.
Hmm.
So one of the things that again, with the purpose of excellence that Aristotle promoted, so he said you'd get to heaven, and he called heaven eudaimonia. And he said you get to eudaimonia if you emulate and habituate.
Hmm.
So emulate some, so, find out something that really resonates with you, that you really love, and you like doing, and habituate and turn it into a habit. And so that practice is going to lead you to, and this is a different dimension than another purpose area, which is a will to dominance, for example, or a will to be
Hmm.
powerful, which is a different purpose.
I think now we're getting a bit philosophical, but just one last bit I want to have the. I was reading somewhere yesterday. So one is that if you want to, improve something, one is you set goals and you start working towards the goals. But the
Yeah,
person who said that you rather focus on the behaviors which will lead to those goals rather than the
so
goal
true,
itself. So I think
so true.
that's broadly the gist of what you've been saying. So, very interesting conversation, Arnab. I think we can go on talking forever. But, to conclude our podcast, one question that I'd like to ask you is that what is your, message to people who are listening?
I'll draw from, I don't have any specific messages. I'm no scholar. We ride on the shoulders of giants. There's lots of work that's been done in
But
these
there's a lot
areas.
of reading that you do. Still do?
I I happen to read people more than books, but
Okay.
but yes, it
So,
helps to
what's the
read.
book that you're reading now?
There are tons of books, but I'd like to promote three ideas, if
Okay,
it's all right.
sure. Yes, yes.
So the first is to do with, again, what you just mentioned a little earlier about goal setting, uh, atelic goals rather than telic goals. Now,
Okay.
atelic are boundless goals, the goals
Okay.
that actually lead to no specific end.
Yeah.
Okay, so for example, if I'm a mountaineer, and again, just taking that Everest example, I go and conquer Everest. That's not the end,
End. Yeah.
right? That's actually the beginning. So if I were to set a goal that I'm going to conquer Everest, that's going to be an outcome of a deeper personal level goal that gives me meaning, which is to inspire people to mountaineering, for example. So if I could be very careful about not setting goals that are outcomes or outcome biased goals, then then the chances are I'm going to be setting goals that are very meaningful and purposeful.
Yeah.
So that's one. So atelic rather than telic. Telic is bounded, finite. Um, so I think Simon Sinek wrote a fabulous book here, The Infinite Game. So he says to be in the game is therefore a lot more. That's his conclusion. Is
Yeah.
therefore more
Yeah.
interesting than to just play to win,
The
for example.
process and the journey.
The process and the journey. The journey is the destination. Yes, the journey then becomes the destination. So that's one. The second is about existential uh, thinking or existentialism, which really is about telling me that I don't know why I've come where I am. I don't know what has brought me here. My parents, decided to have a child, and so here I am now. I don't know. It wasn't my decision to come to this place. But now that I'm here,
Yeah.
right, where I go from here on is my decision,
Yes.
right? So I decide. There's no syllabus, there is no prescription, there is no chosen path for me. I'm not chosen for anything. Although you have a soda daru water bottle wala written on your forehead, in certain communities you have a certain profession that's sort of but if you were to take matters in your hands and to say that I decide where I go next, and that's going to be based on my ability to take the right decisions, and then therefore I'm going to focus on quality of decisions
Hmm.
that I'm going to make. I'm going to get that much better in decision making. That would be very useful for existential thinking. So that's the second. And the third principle, that it's something that I would like to offer, if for whatever it's worth, is the very fact that there are so many people. There are tons of people with tons of worldviews, and some worldview I may not agree with. Right? Someone may have a certain truth,
Yeah.
knowledge, value that I don't agree with. So to be a relativist in all of this, rather than to be an absolutist or an emotivist, I think
Hmm.
is about, a little bit of emotion is necessary, but I'm not referring to emotions when I'm saying emotivist. Emotivist is to say 𝗵𝗂𝗵𝗃𝗵𝗃𝗵 when it comes to having a very tough stance on something that I'm taking.
Yeah. Yeah.
That it won't work because I say it won't work, and there's a very strong passion driven towards that negative
Hmm.
attribute. So to take that off and to place it all in the context of relativism, to say that, all right, I have certain world views that are my own and that have come apart through nature and apart through nurture, and I
Hmm.
understand that these are mine and I'm unique. And so is everyone else. So is Satinder. So is everyone else. And they have worldviews which could be
Yeah.
different. So for me to operate within a spirit of relativism makes it a lot easier for me to interact with the world.
Then you're not in conflict.
Yeah.
It's an acceptance mode, yeah, and that's the best. So just recently, I've been reading the almanac of Naval Ravikant. I've got a bit of influence around that.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So very nice, Arnab. It is always lovely to talk to you, to learn a lot. And your ability to express what you think, I think, is is one of your strengths. So it's been a great conversation, and let's hope we do part two, part three. We pick up some things, and let's stay in touch. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your experience.
Thank you very, very much, Satinder, for this opportunity. And I'm so delighted and so grateful to you. Thank you ever so much.
My
God
pleasure.
bless.